I wonder if you're going to be as shocked as I was when I was perusing what we're going to cover today. The men were running away to their basements to work on, projects, sanding, all that sort of things. They were focusing on sports, all these different things that they were doing to escape their women, their wives. Now, you might go, why is that shocking, right? Yeah, but we're talking about in 1958. 1958, the sport was televised baseball. That is just like a sign that they would word it that way, and it would be that sport to remind us all this was a different time entirely. But turns out, even though it's like, wow, televised baseball, can you imagine? Even though it's that, so much of what the men were going through is similar. So much is so similar. Now, 1958 was 11 years before the first state, California, passed no-fault divorce. So, anyway, let's get into it. Hi, welcome to Far From Eden. I almost forgot to welcome you guys and introduce the name of the channel. If you're new here, so glad to have you. This is our third installment of covering of the decline of the American male. This is a first edition because, I wear a permanent invisible tinfoil hat because I don't know that they're not changing these books online. I really don't. It's a whole kind of 1984 situation going on. It is not 2025. It is 1984. And it's been that for a long time. But anyway, before I get going on a rant about all that, I don't think the knowledge of what's going on with men and women in this day and age and how men are treated, etc., I don't think that that's very far off of the conspiracy theories and all the political stuff. But this is not the time. All right, so we left off on our last installment with this little tidbit. Apart from his role at home, the American male at work is governed by three categories of women: his wife, working women, and, in some cases, his secretary. Again, it kind of shows where we are in time. And remember, it's 1958. There weren't a lot of working women, and it was relatively new. It was such a, not just it was new, but it was so foreign to any time in history, really. It just was. So I know people are going to be like, no, at this one time, at this one place, this certain group of women, let's think broadly. Anyway, his wife's most important job influence, of course, is what one scientist terms the, quote, greater compulsion to success. I would say that's whoosh, right? Just push that mule. That's how they treat you guys. Come on, work harder until you're no longer existing. More and more, wives identify economic achievement with masculinity. Yeah, that's so wrong. Occupational success is now an important part of sex appeal, and men are unsexed by failure. right? And who gets to decide what's a failure and when? I just sometimes want to go back to like my third grade self and say, you're not the boss of them. Why do you think you're the boss of men? Why do you think you're the boss of him? Who made you queen of the earth? All these sorts of things. Because honestly, it's that simple. Today, companies are interviewing wives, in some cases, even testing them before hiring or promoting an executive or even a key salesman. Oh, what? What? They're interviewing the wives of the husbands. Wives feel increasingly ready to warn their husbands, quote, don't let them talk you into moving back to Akron, end quote. A vice president of Monsanto Chemical Company has put it this way, quote, the hand that rocks the cradle can also rock the boat. Frankly, the bosses are interviewing the wives before hiring the man because at the end of the day, they know who rules the roost. They know who's in charge. They know who's calling the shots. And this tells us a lot. If the wives were calling the shots to the point where they're being interviewed by the prospective bosses, that's like, there's no doubt. There's no question. It's not an opinion. It's not an opinion. It's what's happening. Because you know what I would say as a wife if I were in that situation and the boss was like, let me speak to the wife, I'd be like, it's not for me. That's not my place. My husband will make the right decision and I will support him in whatever decision that is. And whatever he makes, I will know and do how to stretch that to make it as abundant for our family as possible. And I will be content with whatever it is. Because a man is not valued by his, he is in this society, but he shouldn't be. I don't think intrinsically a man's value is tied to whatever he makes, whatever money he makes. And this is fresh on my mind because I talked to a men's rights advocate yesterday, and we talked for several hours, and it was wonderful to get that whole perspective and listen to what he had to say. And he did bring up the whole, a man is, since when is masculinity defined by how much money you make, and why should that be what your value is? And this whole idea of a high value man, he's right. It should not. That does not define your value. It's a marketplace value as far as what the women decide. But I'll take it a step farther and say, hey, guess what? The women shouldn't be deciding what the man's value is. Just shouldn't. And if you want to say, well, let's look at the outcomes. Does it work well in that situation? Does it work well with this type of system where we are like, well, he's more valuable and he's worth more. I'll do this for him because he does all this. Like, I'll submit to a man if. I'll follow a man if. If. And usually that if is tied to a dollar sign. Right? And hold on. I'm so sorry. I'm bad at this. Do you see the snake? God, I'm bad at this. Sorry if I made anybody seasick. Motion sickness. Anyway, I thought it's interesting. That's sort of like I guess it's a guy, but it's like a snake too, because snake, forbidden fruit, all the sort of thing. Because this is all backwards. It's all backwards. I'm just like, I am so. This continues to catch me off guard. This book continues to shock and surprise me that this was what was going on in 1958. Just when I think it's not any worse, it is. So let's continue and see what else we dig up. Holy moly. Sometimes I just need a breather. Also, can we just point out, we were talking about Monsanto Chemical Company. Funny, we don't know them as chemical company anymore. This is a whole different subject. Okay. The woman on the job can also dominate the American male. She offers unfair competition if she is not above using her attractiveness in a business battle. We don't do that. Sarcasm. In the American hanky-panky revolution, Professor Sorokin says erotic appeal is the basic reason for the promotion of many an employee. I mean, we all know that. They actually said it back then because they could without destroying their whole career and everything. Yeah. I mean, we all know it. And the women know it. The women know it. They're not there. I dress like this for myself. I wear makeup because it helps my confidence. This is the lies. Lies. Most destructive of all is the fact that many working women lose respect for a man who is outdistanced by a woman. Dr. Mead says, quote, when American women do rise to positions of power and status, they have great difficulty in treating their male subordinates with any decent sensitivity. For aren't they failures to be there? I can't wait to hear your comments on that. Because I know you all have been in working situations. You've had female bosses. You've worked with, you know what I mean? I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. When a man reaches a position where he has a secretary, he faces new problems. Some secretaries not only take over a man's work, they buy his clothes, keep his checkbook, make his social dates, and act as his wife away from home, as though he needed one. Well, I have something to say about that part because I'm a woman. If you were a secretary and you were like, I wish I didn't have to work. Hey, I like this guy over here. He's kind of nice and handsome. And of course, she's going to say makes a good living. Well, what is she doing? She's making herself valuable to him. She is setting herself apart, making herself needed. She is competing with the wife. We do that. We compete with each other for men. We just do. It's just the case. I can think of it happening all the way back to when I was 12 years old. It's totally the case. Whew. Women's ability to dominate extends beyond her own personal male. Her own personal male. I'm sorry. I'll try not to keep interrupting. Every sentence is like, what is happening? The measure of her influence on our national life can be taken quickly. Okay. Here's her level of influence, her measure of it. These are bullet points. There are 1,513,000 more women than men in the United States. Well, yeah, 1958. Bunch of them had gone off to war in the middle of the century, hadn't they? Yeah. And the jobs that they had were far more dangerous. Anyways. 8 years ago, there were only 601,000 more. I take back the comments about the giant conflict in the middle of the 20th century, because that was 1950. 1950, there were only 601,000 more women than men. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, next bullet point. The average lifespan for American women is now 73 years. For men, 67. That's the work. That's working them. It's working them to their very end. There are 22.5 million women in the full-time U.S. labor force, according to Mrs. Alice K. Leopold, Assistant to the Secretary of Labor for Women's Affairs, and they earn an estimated $42 billion a year. Nearly 1 out of every 3 American workers is a woman. That's why we cannot live off of one income anymore, because the labor force was doubled. Next bullet point. The National Manpower Council predicts that an increasing proportion of women will hold authority-wielding executive jobs in the future. Right. Next bullet point. By the next presidential election in 1960, there will be 3,250,000 more women voters than men voters. And that also, I believe, was the first election where they had televised debates. Remember the famous debate between, it was Kennedy and Nixon, right? And Nixon was breaking a sweat. And, Kennedy's cool, calm, collected. Women thought he was handsome. Well, 3 million more female voters. Just saying. I'm sure that's not related at all. The next bullet point. The number of women owning securities has increased 35.7% in the past 4 years, rising to 4,455,000. They own 100 billion worth of stocks alone. Women own about 60% of the individual shares of AT&T, 60% at 55 cents. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not reading properly. 50% of DuPont and 54% of General Electric. By numbers alone, the American woman has the means to dominate her men. But perhaps her most crucial national influence to date is economic. As a consumer, Fortune credits her with control over about 60% of all consumer purchases. I think now it's 80%, 70 to 80% of all consumer purchases. In addition, the Gallup poll reports that the wife participates in managing the funds in 71% of American households. And in nearly half of those, the husband has completely surrendered the power of the purse. Yep. I don't know, people of my generation, do you remember, I was back in the day when there were checkbooks and stuff. Do you remember having parents where it was like, the husband doesn't even have a checkbook? Right? I mean, he had credit cards and he had cash, but like the fact that he didn't even have a checkbook, it's like, you're not in charge enough to write a check. You don't you don't balance the checkbook. You don't actually know what's coming in and going out. And this was 1958, so that was, well before my time. Had no idea. No idea. Now, this part particularly interested me. This was part that I that I caught beforehand. It pertains to what we talk about on Sundays with the fairy tales that we read to discover truths that we always used to know. And it's kind of the opposite, like what we used to know and what everything was how everything was understood versus the fall of society, basically. it's juxtaposed very well on this channel, I think, with the addition of the literary archaeology we do on Sunday. So I often talk about Disney and how he took the fairy tales and changed them. Because he's like, I mean, Disney is such a great example of media as far as the entertainment world goes. And I personally think all that is to, everything's a psyop, basically. It's all to propagandize. Walt Disney thinks first of the American women when he is planning his movies and television programs. He explains, this is from Disney's mouth directly, quote, "They're the masters of the TV set and the theater goers. They're the ones who drag men along. If the women like it, the heck with the men," end quote. Automobile manufacturers believe women have achieved an important voice in deciding what cars their husbands will buy. Men are sold by women on baby blue station wagons. And the men's clothing industry credits women with exciting males to buy brightly colored shirts and sports jackets and to own a variety of hats. Oh, Lord have mercy. The American male has developed a number of defenses against female domination. And here we go. Here are the defenses that the men had against all this nonsense. To the wife's order that he come home on time for dinner, the male has developed the commuter's bar car. To the edict that he spend more time with the kids, he has thrown himself violently into such emotional outlets as Little League Baseball. To the demand that he stays home evenings, he has adapted to the distortions of televised baseball. I'd like to say, men like to spend time with their children. They like to. But the thing is that the women want them to spend time with their children the way the women want them to. And it's more of a control. Do you remember in Ms. Villar, first name Esther? Remember her book? Her book that we read on this channel. It was one of the chapters was children as hostages. What? And that's, what they do. It's not the time with the kids. It's not. Notice that if the man does the Little League Baseball with the children, it doesn't involve her. It's not, it's not going to a movie that she has picked, something like that. It's not that. For a while, the male fled to the basement and busied himself sawing, painting, and sandpapering. But the women followed him, and today they are hammering right along with him. No place to hide here. It reminds me of football and how men used to have football to themselves, right? And then now it's like, no, it's a co-ed thing. Many men use their opponent's own weight to throw them. If women are pushing them to work harder, some men are finding more and more escape in the pleasures and fraternity of corporate life. A large portion of business is now conducted, quote, in hiding, end quote, on the golf course and on all-male fishing trips. The men leading this trend, of course, are concentrated in our cities and suburbs where the corporate escape is most available, right? Because 1958, cities were much smaller and big cities were, fewer and farther between. Corporations were fewer and farther between. There was still quite a few people farming and doing such things as that. So this is, however, cities grow like cancer. So they spread. And before you know it, the degradation that's happening in cities is happening everywhere, especially with social media, because the people who are not in the cities still get influenced by the people in the cities. And with, movies and television, I mean, they had what, 2 channels, something like that, 1958. Not everybody had a television, in America at least. So, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. The corporate escape is also one sociological explanation, in addition to our tough tax laws, for the emergence of those favored few, our, quote, expense account society, end quote. Men who can afford only a $1.50 lunch are spending 3 times that in fancy restaurants and when traveling. Live in spacious suites, hire new convertibles, entertain lavishly, and meet all kinds of interesting people. Home is never like this. Well, I would say too, aside from the whole female thing, this is something that the overlords want. They want the men to be tied to the companies, tied to the corporations, loyal to those things. They want that. It helps break the nuclear family. It's just, I believe that the powers that be it's a multi-pronged attack on the nuclear family, and this is just a description of one of them. And it isn't all coming from the women. A ton of it is, especially nowadays. But here you can definitely see that the men are squeezed between 2 places: corporations and the state, and the women. It's like they're just in that crunch, and the 2 work in tandem to destroy him, basically. And every single man who's been in family court is like, yeah, that is where it's absolutely, it crushes you. And it's designed to. Female dominance may, in fact, be one of the several causes of the organization man who is so deplored today. What he is doing is just building his own masculine world. His office is his castle. His expense account buys him comfort and service. William White Jr., author of The Organization Man, says, quote, "The office becomes the spiritual home, the house merely a base of operations." Exactly. Just break the nuclear family. Just break it. But there wasn't any no-fault divorce, and it wasn't making women unhappy enough to get her to want to just get rid of him, dispose of him. He was worth so much more to her as, well, if she stayed his wife. Translation, there weren't cash and prizes yet for destroying the family. That wasn't a thing. There wasn't incentive to do so. There was still incentive not to. Women will say, women were trapped. They had no financial freedom. They didn't have the means to leave their husbands. They couldn't, etc., etc. Now, in very, very rare cases where the man was a monster, I suppose that might be right. But also, where is the woman's family? during this time, one of the things the women who say all this stuff, one of the things they're forgetting is people had parents, and their parents weren't that much older than them back then, because people didn't wait till they were 30 to have children back then. So you would have parents who were like 20 years older than you, and you would have more brothers and sisters than what is around now. So you would have a family structure that if you were in such a situation, you would have that framework to, first of all, say, hey, we can tell something's going on. And second of all, say, come here, we'll take care of you, we'll help you, etc. But that little tidbit is not talked about because it's made up. It's all made up what they're saying. Nobody talks about this history, do they? They talk about, oh, there's like boogeyman stories. I'm getting so upset. I lost my spot. All right. The National Desertion Bureau reports on a more drastic defense against dominating women. Not dominating women, dominating women. Like the one who does the dominating. Okay. It estimates that 100,000 men a year now desert their families without legal arrangements. 100,000 men desert their families. That is the equivalent of all the married men in Columbus, Ohio, or Portland, Oregon. Even more husbands, of course, find escape in separation or divorce. Isn't that funny? They were the ones doing it then. The decline in male potency that doctors observe may be man's most dangerous defense. Defense in hanky-panky can take three forms. First, of course, is bachelorhood. In America, despite the fact that more and more people are marrying, 1 in every 7.9 men between 25 and 54 is still single. 1 in every 7.9 men between 25 and 54 is still single. It is different now. Second, and more surprising, counselors who help marriages in trouble are now beginning to see a new development: defense by retaliation. Here, the man meets his wife's aggression by withdrawing from hanky-panky. This phenomenon is so new that marriage counselors cannot estimate its prevalence. The third reaction is homosexuality, which one scientist labels the flight from masculinity. Very interesting that's so interesting. Dr. Kinsey estimated that 1 in every 13 American men between the ages of 16 and 55 has been a full-fledged homosexual for at least 3 years during his adult life. Interesting. Well, that's a whole other topic, isn't it? How did the American male get into this pit of subjugation where even his masculinity is in doubt? I'm sorry, that is Lola being a bad girl. She finds the thing that makes the most noise and she's on it. Sorry about that. Rudeness, naughty. How did the American male get into this pit of subjection where even his masculinity is in doubt? Authorities point to a succession of steps in American history that make man's present plight seem almost inevitable. Well, isn't that funny? Because that's kind of what we're saying now. What was going on in 1958 makes what's going on now inevitable. And in the next installment, the next episode of covering the decline of the American male, we are going to get into, I'm not going to read ahead, I promise. I'm not going to peek. We're going to get into what in history led up to this. I cannot wait. I am a big history nerd, and so I'm super excited. So that episode's going to be, that'll be coming quickly. So it's probably going to be tomorrow. I'm not going to lie. I can't wait. I can't wait. So I hope you enjoyed that and found it as fascinating as I did. When you see me smiling, this stuff doesn't make me happy. This is me. I love discovering this stuff. I love revealing truth. It lights me up because it's that moment in Scooby-Doo where you rip the mask off and you say, hey, women, it was you the whole time. And I'm like, yes, gotcha. Right? But I get it. We don't got them because you're still in this mess. You've still dealt with what you've dealt with. Your kids have still been alienated. You know, it doesn't bring any of that back. And I wish I could. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make it so it never happened. I wish it could make things different. And in real life, reaching out to women a little bit at a time, one at a time, because I know that's kind of how you have to do it. And I'm working up to how to approach it in a bigger way on like a YouTube video, something like that. But at least with all of this, you can know it's not just you that's gone through this. It's not just you, and it's not just your peers of today or the last 10 years or the last 20 years or the last 50 years. You've been dominated for a long, long time. And the whole idea of when feminism started and third wave so bad, etc., like you've got to go back and really look at the roots of this stuff. So that's why I'm so excited for them to get to the roots of this stuff. Like, let's trace it back. Well, we all know the name of this channel is Far From Eden, because if you keep tracing it back, you're going to come to a tree and a snake. That's where it leads. So I am so glad that you guys are along for the journey of going through this and getting to the truth of all of it, the root of all of it, and calling it out in every decade, in every century, especially today, but all of it. And I want you to know that it's not just you, and that it is not safe out there to date or marry or any of that. It's just not. The law is against you. It's not that every woman will, it's that every woman can. And that's just the truth of it. And until that changes, and you're guys going to say, oh no, there's still good women out there. Probably. But you don't know which ones. You won't be able to tell. We're all actresses. On that note, I will remind you to protect your peace. Protect it. Feed your souls. I love you guys, and I'll see you on the next one.